What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this one, I'm going to be showing you how to build an awesome $1,000 gaming PC build, perfect for crushing through the latest titles at 1080p, high settings with high frame rates to boot. Whether you're playing Apex Legends, Fortnite, Overwatch 2, or more demanding games like Modern Warfare 2 Remastered, this build has you covered. Let's do this. As always, I'm going to start this video off by taking a look at all the parts that make it possible before assembling it step by step, so you can follow along if you like and look at performance later, so that if you decide to build this system, you know exactly what to expect. We'll start off by looking at the graphics card, shall we? First off, do things a little bit differently today, and this is the ASUS RX 6650 XT. Now, when it comes to graphics cards, the whole market's a bit of a mess, really. I did a video recently where I talked about PC parts to avoid and also the best GPUs you can buy this year, and the 6650 XT is high in my estimations. Providing a nice performance bump over the 6600 XT, it beats out conclusively the more expensive RTX 3060. AMD's 6000 series didn't start off the strongest, but the 50 refreshes combined with game and driver optimizations now make these some of the most compelling options on the market. Plus, with the next gen 4000 and RX 7000 series of GPUs being just so expensive, this really is a solid option. As mentioned previously though, all the benchmarks will be later on, so stay tuned for those. For the CPU platform, much like basically all of my builds recently, Intel's 13th generation lineup of CPUs is going to do the job nicely. I'd love to feature the AMD Ryzen 7000 series more, but to be honest, they're not really worth it. This 13400F chip comes in from Intel, and with a staggering 10 cores on a budget i5 and 16 threads, this thing is impressive. Now, disclaimer, 6 of those cores are Intel's performance cores, good for things like gaming or editing, while the other 4 are efficiency cores. They're less good for gaming, but what they do is take the background tasks like your 100 Chrome tabs or your Discord chats, for example, it offloads them onto the efficiency cores, leaving the performance cores for gaming only, giving us a higher core count and better performance. Clock speeds are also very strong, way better than what we saw with Intel's 12th gen, which for that reason alone makes it a solid choice over the slightly older and cheaper Intel or AMD processors for that fact. Brand new B760 motherboards also mean you haven't got to spend a fortune on a motherboard design. My recent video talks about how exactly you go about picking a good motherboard for a range of different build budgets, and spoiler alert, the ASUS TUF Gaming lineup do a pretty good job on the whole. This board's got a couple of features which are particularly notable: 4 RAM DIMMs for dual channel memory performance, PCI Generation 5 for next gen future graphics card and SSD support, and DDR4 memory support, meaning we can use a cheaper DDR4 memory kit like this Corsair Vengeance RGB design rather than a more pricey modern DDR5 option. The difference between them as well, by the way, right now, pretty negligible. The only thing you'll see really is the price that changes. Over time, DDR5 kits will become lower latency and outpace DDR4 in terms of performance, but we're not quite there yet. Storage for the build comes in the form of Samsung's SSD 980. It's Gen 3, so you don't get Gen 4 speeds, but you still get about 3 gigabytes a second, read and write. Pretty good, and we've reviewed this very positively over on GeekaWhat.com. Otherwise though, I think we're pretty much there. The only final 3 parts to cover off all come in from Cooler Master: the case, the cooler, and the power supply. The CMP 520 is the case of the day, not the Master Box variant, the more basic edition, but with mesh on the front, 3 RGB fans, and a price point that cannot be beaten, it's a very solid choice. They also offer a CMP 320 for those of you looking at a smaller form factor build with support for smaller motherboards and less desk real estate required. Power is also provided by a Cooler Master unit, the MWE Gold 750. You could also opt for the cheaper 650, but at the time of putting this video together, the two were very similarly priced, so the 750 gives us an extra 100 watts for basically not much more money. Latest pricing and availability is linked at the affiliate links below, as always. Cooling, finally, is the last part on the list, the MA612 from Cooler Master. A little little bit overkill, but once again, we got a good deal on this, which made it a good no-brainer. The entire stock cooler also works fine, but it's a bit ugly and can be quite loud, and Cooler Master's Hyper 212 RGB provides a nice middle ground for those wanting to spend just that little bit less and achieve just that little bit more than the stock cooler that comes included with the CPU. And with that, I think the parts are pretty much concluded. It's time to actually put this system together and get ourselves a PC. First things first in the build process is take the motherboard out of the box. Now, you might have seen a few tutorials here and there where they say keep the motherboard on the box, and they are basically right. Don't put the motherboard on like an anti-static bag or anything like that. The box in of itself is anti-static enough. I remember when I built my first PC and I used one of those anti-static sort of wrist wrap thingies. I've not used one of those in about, well, since that video really, which I filmed for the channel all those years ago. One of our best videos ever, by the way. I would say check out in the cards, but please don't. It's very embarrassing. Either way, it paved the way for where we are today, and it means we can install the CPU into this tough gaming motherboard. So lift up the arms, it opens up, kind of like gull-wing doors on a car. But for CPUs, and then the processor is going to drop in nice and easily. I will be doing the CPU cooler in a moment, but first, just going to finish things off with the RAM and SSD. Slots 2 and 4 for the memory, so the grey ones in the case of this board, while the SSD sits under the top M.2 heatsink. You'll need a small screwdriver for this rather than a large Phillips head, and it just clips in nice and easily. The cooler can be a tricky process in of itself, but what you want to do is split it down into a few key steps. The first is this backplate, with the scaffolding side, as I like to call it, compared to the blank smooth side facing towards the bottom of the board. You need to add in these silver posts. What these are going to do is then sit through the holes around the CPU socket. These can be accessed from the back of the motherboard and can be just a little bit fiddly. So pop those in like so, nicely done, and slide the board into place. Add on these posts, which are going to actually screw straight on to those 4 silver screws we just put through. So you can see here, there's one, there's the second, the third, and the fourth, just here in this top left-hand corner. And you also get an included tool which helps to tighten these things up. You can also do it by hand, they don't have to be mega tight or anything like that. Then add these brackets onto the bottom of the cooler before screwing the entire cooler unit into the 4 posts that we just added in a second ago. Remember as well to add a dab of thermal paste on about the size of a large grain of rice, just in order to ensure that we get a good level of heat transfer and decent efficiency in this regard. And once this is all done, in theory, you should be able to pick the motherboard up by the CPU cooler without too many issues. This is then what we like to call the completed motherboard assembly. And in this case, it's quite top heavy given the size of this air cooler. I'll be going ahead and moving it into the case. Cooler Master's CMP 520, which while a standard ATX chassis can be a little bit tight, not overly difficult, but it's just something to be aware of. This case definitely does not have captive thumb screws. Where did that go? Ah, it's lost. Nope, found it. There we are. The glass panel can come off nice and easily. Same with the rear panel as well. Lovely jubbly. And then I can just go ahead, slide the motherboard in, make sure the I/O is all lined up through the back cutout. Looking good. Nice. And the raised center standoff holds it in place to give us a bit of time to get the whole thing screwed in without too many problems. Once the motherboard's in though, progress is definitely being made, and actually not too many bits to go. That then paves the way for the installation of the graphics card, AMD's Radeon 6650 XT. Now this particular model is the ASUS Dual. What that means is it's got ASUS's specific dual fan cooler installed upon it. A design that not only allows for a bit of factory overclocking and consumer overclocking if you wish, but one that also keeps the card nice and cool, as the name cooler suggests, and does so at a lower price point than other options on the market. Taking a look at the case, and what you first want to do is hover the card over the slot for which it's going to be installed. Doing so in this case reveals that the PCIe lane covers have already been removed in the right locations. The reason this case hasn't got any covers there is because we've used it before, and more importantly they're single use, meaning once they've been taken off, they're off. Now if you take a look at this PCIe slot just here, simply push the clip back, line the graphics card up. You might need to get your head in there and actually just physically check it's all looking okay. Bit of pressure. Clicks into place, nice and easy. Couple of screws are just going to be installed here as well to fasten it in, clamp it there, and stop any GPU sag or unnecessary strain on the PCIe socket. It also, of course, stops something like this from being able to happen. The final piece of the puzzle then is just the power supply. Cooler Master's MWE 750 Gold V2 fully modular could do with a slightly catchier name. Power supply's bit of a minefield at the moment, but of course we're not using a next-gen graphics card with the requirement for PCI Gen 5 or a motherboard with an ATX3 requirement either, which simplifies things a good deal. I'll just be adding in motherboard, GPU and CPU power cables to our unit and plugging everything up to the motherboard, graphics card and CPU in the case. And there we have it. Now there's a couple of things left to do, a few wires to tidy up, and of course some performance benchmarks to check out. Does this thing stack up how I'm hoping? Well, we'll have to wait and see, but before any of that, it's time to boot this thing up and see how good it looks in an epic GeekaWhat glam montage. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage.
You know that I need you. I swear that I need you. I'm running in circles 'cause I need you.
Taking a look at performance, and I've put this build through its paces in a range of the latest and most popular titles. 1080p and 1440p were both the resolutions of the day, so why don't we start things off by looking at Warzone 2 first of all. Here at 1080p with FSR enabled and set to quality, this build pulled in an impressive 145 frames per second on average. 90 and 99th percentile results were good too, in the region of 131 and 120. Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 2 at 1080p, very similar game mechanically to Warzone 2, and here at 1080p with FSR once again enabled and set to quality, pulled in 160 FPS. Modern Warfare 2 Remastered looked awesome at 1080p with these settings cranked to high, where the 6650 XT shows itself to be a card that really has got better with age. Fortnite at 1080p competitive next up also shone a light on the 6650 XT's impressive performance credentials, bringing in a solid 284 FPS. Fun fact, this frame rate is not only higher than Nvidia's much more expensive 3060 Ti at the same settings, but also even better marginally than a 4080, showing that this build's powerful CPU and GPU combo can really defy the realms of its budget. Apex Legends also worked well, 1080p high this time around, delivered 184 frames per second with 170 and 160 for the 90 and 99th percentiles, while other games like Overwatch 2, an admittedly easier to run title, stacked up well at 1080p too. Ultra settings here gave us 246 FPS on average. This is a build that really excels when it comes to 1080p gaming and delivers strong performance at a relatively budget price point. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you guys in the next one.